I'm Debbie Gross. I'm the CEO of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. So PMC was established 35 years ago after a report from the Pennsylvania Judicial Reform Commission, appointed by then Governor Casey, found a very low level of confidence in Pennsylvania's judicial system arising from the election of judges and the corresponding conflicts from raising monies. So keep that in mind. We still elect our judges in Pennsylvania. PMC was created to advocate for a number of judicial reforms as well as on behalf of an independent judiciary. We educate Pennsylvanians about our court system through a series of educational programs which we bring to community organizations. So as a note, if anybody is interested in our programming, and PMC bringing our programming to them, please let us know. We work with libraries, schools, community organizations, journalists across the state and even the country. We want to make sure that the courts are more accessible to individuals and individuals are comfortable in the court system. We also have a court watch program where we train observers of arraignments and early bail review hearings, and we'll be issuing a report on observers' comments by the end of the summer. And since this is a judicial election year, we host candidate forums to showcase the candidates and inform Pennsylvanians about judicial elections, about the candidates, and the importance of the judiciary. And as you know, we held our one-day law school for journalists to help journalists, the press, the media understand the court system in which they are reporting. Lawyers have difficulty with understanding the complexities of the legal system in court cases, and they have 3 years of training. We hope to provide you with some basic information to inform your reporting and give you the tools to ask questions and seek answers. Courts address issues affecting so many aspects of our lives. Journalists and reporters are the firewall of our democracy. While judges are limited by their code of conduct from publicly speaking about pending matters in cases and issues before them, you, the press, can shine a light on their decisions and on court proceedings. Both judges and the press hold unique positions among our democratic institutions. The independence of both and the freedom from undue influences are the cornerstone of a democratic society and safeguards for the freedoms and rights of our citizens. Both the press and the judiciary have faced challenging times during the past 4 years. And we will hear from many of our speakers about how we can overcome some of those challenges. We have an amazing program planned today. We have over 300 participants who have registered. Please feel free to put where you're from in the chat box so we can talk. Also, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. You will be muted throughout this program, but we will be monitoring the chat box and try to take your questions. This program will be recorded and available on our website. We will also be sending you, after the program, a survey to complete. I can't emphasize the importance of your completing the survey. We used last year's survey to help us formulate programs for this year. We also used last year's survey for some foundation grants. So your support and feedback is truly appreciated. Also, we are under serious time constraints because we put so much into this program. So I will not give detailed descriptions of our panelists, but we will be sending you the bios of all of our panelists. But we have an amazing group of panelists today who I'm so excited that they have agreed to join us. I'm going to begin my presentation with the coverage of civil litigation and courts in general. I had 30 minutes to do a 50-minute PowerPoint, so I will be speaking very rapidly, but this PowerPoint will be available to you afterwards. We can send it out, or you can reply, ask us for it, okay? So with that, I'm going to start. And again, I want to thank you so very much for coming. So a little bit, I briefly touched upon what PMC does or has done, but this is just a slide so you know, but we are a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit. So we are not taking any political positions in this program, nor do we take any political positions. Next, Kathleen. Next. So what do you need to do? How do you go about understanding, coverage of a court case? Like, what do? You need to do some research before you actually just go into the courtroom. You need to figure out where the case is, what court, what courthouse, who the judge is, because these are really important factors in your understanding the overall picture. What rules are involved? There are many different rules. There are state rules, there are county rules, there are federal rules. What has occurred in the case to date? You're going in to watch a hearing or watch a trial, and it's only one part of a lengthy process. What civil law has been violated or what criminal law has been violated. Also, very important, to whom can you reach out for information? Do you know a lawyer? Do you know another journalist who might be a lawyer? Do you know a former judge? What are you covering? Are you covering a hearing? Are you covering a trial? Are you covering a post-sentencing matter? So these are many factors that you need to take into consideration when you are covering a case. Next slide. So which court? Let's talk about that. Our federal court system. Okay, it's a small slide, there's a lot of information, but the federal court system, as we know, has the highest court, our U.S. Supreme Court. There's only one of those entities. We hear all about it. Underneath the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court only takes a small, I'll say, smattering of cases that are out there, okay? Cases are appealed to the Supreme Court from the U.S. Court of Appeals. There are 12 different courts of appeals across the country, plus the Federal Circuit Court. That second tier, the U.S. Court of Appeals, gets cases from the, I'll say, entry-level courts. I use that term generally in the federal system. There are 94 U.S. district courts across the country. Okay, these U.S. district courts are the first entry level for matters in the federal system. So what types of cases are in the federal system, right? There's two different systems. There's a federal system and there's a state system in our country. And our Constitution was set up to make sure that both systems can operate independent of each other. There are cases right now out there about the impact of states interpreting federal law or federal courts interpreting state law. But the types of cases that are heard in federal court, right, involve matters of federal law, involve interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, involve cases where both plaintiffs and defendants are from a different state, and the matter is greater than $75,000. There are additionally the cases involving maritime. There are any kind of case that needs to that addresses a dispute between states. It addresses disputes concerning treaties of the U.S. or ambassadors and public ministers, and bankruptcy matters. Next slide. So these are the 11 regions that have been set up for the geography for the circuit courts, and there's also a DC district court, so that's our DC district federal circuit, so that's our 12th circuit. Next. And I talked about the federal circuit briefly, but I just wanted to let you know that it's truly unique. So Pennsylvania has a similar, I'll say, unique appellate court in that it addresses various specific subject matters: international trade, government contracts, patents, trademarks, money claims against the U.S. government. So it is a unique court, our federal circuit court. Next. So the bankruptcy court I mentioned briefly, that is again a court that has jurisdiction under the federal laws, and this is where individuals can file or businesses or corporations can file for protection under the bankruptcy code. There is also another unique court, I'll say, that's in our federal system, and that is the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation. I wanted to bring that to your attention because one of the judges on our panel has has a well-known reputation for handling many cases that have been sent to her from the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation. This panel, so there may be cases filed across the country in different federal courts concerning the same matter. Maybe, some type of drug matter, for example, or a securities case or an antitrust case, but they've been filed in different courts. There is a motion that's typically made to bring them all together in front of one court for pretrial matters. It's for efficiency's sake, right? So the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation will hear that issue and decide it. Okay, Kathleen, next. Wanted to point out a few things about the federal judicial system, right? The rulemaking in the federal courts is approved and finalized, I will say, and I'm using that generally, by Congress pursuant to the Rules Enabling Act. The rules are proposed by the Supreme Court. There are committees of the Supreme Court. There are hearings about the proposed rule changes, but the final approval comes through Congress. Again, also, we will discuss this later, but open meetings and records, right? The committees of the federal court, of the Supreme Court, are open to the public, are announced. Information about them is available on the court's website, uscourts.gov. Next, Kathleen. So I know many of you are from all over the country, but so every state has a different setup for the courts. But since we're based in Pennsylvania, I just wanted to give you a little bit about our Pennsylvania court system. And this triangle is not exactly correct, but we'll make it work. I'm not sure what happened here. But Pennsylvania's highest court is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now, in New York, for example, New York Supreme Court is its entry-level court. So while we all think that the term Supreme Court designates the highest court of the state, maybe, or of our country, it's not a given. It's not 100%. But again, our Pennsylvania Supreme Court is our highest court in Pennsylvania. It takes matters on appeal. It has the discretion to decide which matters it can take. Additionally, there is a particular way a matter can just be originally heard by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court through a King's Bench petition and other matters, but that appeals to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which also, again, decides matters concerning Pennsylvania law, is in essence the ultimate authority on Pennsylvania law. As a note, sometimes federal courts will ask a question of their state Supreme Court for interpretation of a state law. It doesn't happen that often, but there are methods by which the federal court can ask the state's highest court for an interpretation. So in any event, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, again, has discretionary authority, so it can decide what cases it would like to take, and the cases that it takes are appeals typically from either the Commonwealth Court or the Superior Court. Those two courts in Pennsylvania are known as our intermediate appellate courts. Now again, Pennsylvania is unique in that it has this Commonwealth appellate, or a Commonwealth Court, which is an intermediate appellate court, and the Commonwealth Court is a specialized, I'm going to use that term in quotes, a specialized court in that it addresses matters brought by counties and states. It recently issued, our Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court recently had a very lengthy trial and issued a decision about whether the Pennsylvania education system violated our Constitution. The court had weeks of testimony. The case ran for over 6 years, and the court issued an 800-page decision saying that Pennsylvania's education system was not constitutional. So the Commonwealth Court is a very important court in Pennsylvania. That, for example, the decision from that court was not appealed to the Supreme Court, so the decision is the ultimate authority and ruling on the interpretation with respect to of the Pennsylvania Constitution with respect to education. The other intermediate appellate court in Pennsylvania is our Superior Court, and this court is often noted as one of the busiest courts in the country because it's an automatic right of appeal of a matter from a court of common pleas. And so it may not issue a decision in every case, but every case that can or has the potential to be appealed to the Superior Court. The courts from which the cases are appealed to the Superior Court in Pennsylvania are called the Courts of Common Pleas. You know, again, different states title their courts differently. Our Courts of Common Pleas have a broad range of jurisdiction, right, against over criminal and civil matters. For civil matters, the jurisdiction is over $12,000. If the matter is under $12,000, the matter typically will be brought before either we call them the Courts of Limited Jurisdiction in Philadelphia. It's called the Philadelphia Municipal Court. Across the state, the cases are brought in magisterial district courts. So, and we have many, we have over 500 magisterial district judges. An interesting note in Pennsylvania, you know, all of our judges from the Courts of Common Pleas in Municipal Court, Superior Court, Commonwealth Court, Supreme Court have to go to law school, pass the bar exam, right, and be lawyers. In Pennsylvania, our magisterial district court judges don't necessarily have to be lawyers. They can be lawyers, but if they're not lawyers, they take a class, an intensive class. They have to pass an exam and in order to become a magisterial district judge, and then they have to take continuing judicial education every year, all magisterial district judges. So there is an important part of the Supreme Court's, I'll say, jurisdiction over Pennsylvania judges. They oversee the continuing education of judges. Next slide, Kathleen. The Supreme Court also oversees the practice of law, right? Admits, has a judicial conduct board. It also, our Pennsylvania Supreme Court also has the ultimate authority on rules. So it has rules committees, it has advisory boards, advisory groups, which propose rules, put them out for comment, but our Supreme Court in Pennsylvania has the ultimate authority as to whether to approve rule changes. That's different from the U.S. Supreme Court, so you know. And as I mentioned previously, in Pennsylvania, we elect our judges. Now, not all states elect judges. There are many different ways judges are selected, and that would take a very long time to discuss, so we'll save that for another day. Next slide, Kathleen. So I just wanted to briefly, emphasize there is a significant difference, right, between the federal system and the state court system. So that's why it is important for you to understand what court you are in, because the type of case, the law that's been violated, the judge before whom the matter is being heard, these all impact your coverage of the court. Okay, next, Kathleen. So again, now I want to explain to you how you can find information on the court. So I urge you to use the internet. I can't believe I'm saying that, but the internet is your friend. All the courts have websites, and there is a lot of information available on each of their websites. So I'm going to take as an example the federal court in Pennsylvania, the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania has 3 different districts, I will say, because it's so large. So we have a Western District of Pennsylvania for Pittsburgh, we have a Middle District of Pennsylvania for the middle of the state, and we have the Eastern District of Pennsylvania for the eastern part of the state. So next slide. So again, just as an example, this is the screenshot from the front page of the federal court, in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of information that you can avail yourself of. I can tell you where the courthouse is. That's important. Sometimes I've even gone, and I'm an attorney, I've gone to the wrong courthouse, because in Pittsburgh, many of the state courts are in different buildings, but in very close proximity. You can find out information on the judges. You can find out the rules that the judges have. Every judge has their own, I'll say, operating procedures. It is really important for you to find out about that. You can find out about the clerk's office procedures. The websites sometimes list hearings, times, important cases, important documents. So this is an important resource for you. Next slide. So similarly, in Pennsylvania, our entry-level court, our Court of Common Pleas, you can go to our court website and find out information about the various divisions, right? The trial division has a civil section and a criminal section. There is a family division, which has a domestic relations, and a juvenile, which includes domestic relations and juvenile. There is an orphans division, which is I love when we use that term, orphans court. It is an old English language reference, but it actually addresses more than orphans, right? It addresses estates. It addresses adoption. It's a broad terminology that is being used. It also addresses guardianship, or taking care of individuals who are incapacitated or unable to take care of themselves. So Grace will talk shortly, I know I'm running out of time, about our funny legalese language that we use in our court system, but these are various courts that you need to become familiar with and understand what their jurisdiction or what their coverage is. Okay, next slide. And next slide, since I talked through that. So as I keep mentioning, but there are many different rules governing the courts, and I can't emphasize enough that you may see a judge make a ruling and say this doesn't make any sense, but the judge is bound by the rules of evidence, by the rules of procedure, as well as case law, precedent, statute. So you need to understand and try to do a little bit of research about the rules that are applicable. So again, we're going to go through some of the rules. I'm just going to list them quickly, but these are we have federal rules, state rules, local rules, as I've mentioned, rules of judicial administration. There are rules, there are codes of conduct for judges. There are codes of conduct for lawyers. There's no codes of conduct that I know of in the court system for the media, other than you'll hear there are certain times when you can't video, you can't record, you can't take notes, but that also differs by courthouse and by court. Next slide. So these are some of the types of federal rules. Next slide. These are some of the Pennsylvania rules. And next slide. And then every court, again, has its own set of local rules. So, it's an overwhelming, honestly, amount of rules that have to be complied with. Next slide. What do you do? If you want to learn about the rules, you can, again, check the website. You could actually call the clerk's office for that court and ask them what rules are applicable in the case, where you could find information on the rules. You could call the judges' chambers. I caution that they do not expect a response from the judges' chambers, but there's a possibility. Some judges will speak to reporters about the rules, not about a case. But that is one method. Also, you could call an attorney. You can call a local bar association. They have individuals there who can answer your questions. So there are many options for you to research and use. Next slide. So again, don't go into the courtroom without some basic knowledge. Most important, can you bring first and foremost, even when you enter the courthouse, what's going to happen? Is there a metal detector? So do you have to leave certain things in your car? Can you bring your phone, computer, or recording device? This varies across courts, so make sure you find out the information. Can you take pictures, record, or transmit information while you're in the courtroom? Again, you need to find out this information because you do not want to be held in contempt of court? Are there any confidentiality or non-disclosures in existence with respect to the case that you should be aware of? So there may be a hearing and there may be information that is confidential, right? It could either be maybe blacked out in a document, it could be redacted, or the court could decide that the courtroom is not open to the public for a limited time period and ask everybody to leave. I know that later on you will hear from some experts who can talk about motions to open the court, to get information, but you need to find out what the current state of affairs is with respect to the matter on which you're reporting when you go there. If you want to change matters, those motions will need to be filed beforehand. Next slide. So, for example, quickly, the local rule for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania right now currently talks about that there are no judicial proceedings may be broadcast by radio or television or films, right? So we've seen recently, trials on the news, but there have been specific motions in various courts to permit live coverage of trials. We see pictures of artists, renderings up from trials more frequently, but again, it is changing. Again, different courts have different rules. Next slide. So this is also from the Pennsylvania court website. It talks about its public records and public records policies. And again, certain information is private. And when attorneys file cases or file briefs or motions, there has to be information that is redacted. It is any type of financial information, healthcare information, some type of identifying information has to be redacted by the party, the attorney or the litigant, pro se litigant, before it is filed. Social security numbers are confidential. Financial account numbers, driver's license numbers. These are, as we all know, these are matters that this is information that if it could be used improperly, let's say. Okay, next. So how do I find out information about a specific case? So almost all courts, not all, but almost all courts have filings that are available electronically. Again, not all are free, some are. Some courts have links to important cases. So for example, the Pennsylvania court website lists important cases, lists the name of the case, you click on it, we'll have filings from that case. There is an old-fashioned way where you could go to the clerk's office and actually look at a computer screen there, or look at dockets about cases, or you could reach out to some courthouses. Some courts have a media contact office, media resource person. Next slide. So a brief overview about the federal system and a federal docketing system. It is called PACER. You do have to sign in, you do have to have an account, but there is a lot of information that can be available on PACER. So, if you Google it, right, research it, you can find out that information. Next slide. The federal PACER system has judicial opinions available. You can also find opinions available most frequently on the court's own website as well. There is a list on every court, again, has a different website. They're not all uniform, but you can go to the, that district court website, that appellate court website, that Supreme Court website and federal system, and look on the entering page, on the front page, and you can click into judicial opinions. Next slide. We talked about briefly the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation and how it refers cases to different courts around the country. So even in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, for example, on its website, there is a subcategory that lists the cases that the Eastern District of Pennsylvania has received from the Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation. Again, every court has a different method of displaying this information, but there are certain courts that are more frequent, I'll say frequent flyers, meaning they've received more multi-district litigation from the JPML, so that they have set up these separate subcategories. Next, Kathleen. And again, there are some free sources of information that are available. Next. So quickly, for Pennsylvania dockets, we can find them out on the UJSportal.pacourts.us. Go on to the Pennsylvania Courts website, pacourts.us, and you can search for, court opinions and postings. You can search for court orders. Next slide. And I just discussed that. Next slide. This is our Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is known as the first judicial district, and we can search on the courts.phila.gov. Next. Allegheny, this is the civil trial division in Philadelphia. Next. Also, another example is the 5th Judicial District, which is Allegheny County or Pittsburgh area, for those of you who are not from Pennsylvania. Next. This is our Montgomery County, another county in Pennsylvania. Keep going. Next, please. Next, please. And so, what kind of information can you find out online? A lot, right? You can find out names of parties and their attorneys, the name of the judge, the courthouse, the status of the case, when hearings and trials are scheduled. You can find out the pleadings in a case. You may not be able to access the pleadings, but you could find out what's been filed, what has happened. The initial matter to start a case is a complaint, which is something that you should look at before you go into court, so you understand what the cause of action what cause of action is involved. The case is filed by, and Grace will discuss this, by a plaintiff. You also want to find out the defendant, the individual entity that's been sued, their position. They have typically filed a response. If not, there's been a motion, there's some type of motion to dismiss the complaint, but the motion has a memorandum of law in support of it, so that these provide information about the matter. Discovery is not typically included in online, I'll say, accessible information. It is typically just between the parties in a matter. However, you can sometimes get discovery information when there are disputes. So if a party feels that interrogatories, the questions have not been answered, if the documents have not been produced, there will be a motion, or there will be motion practice about this, and contained within that motion practice might be the exhibits of the interrogatories, of the document requests, examples of documents. So you'll have to dig a little deeper, but there should be a lot of information available to you through online dockets and websites. Okay, next slide. So I think I've hit my point, but this is, trials. I wanted to emphasize that most cases get settled. They do not go to trial. So while we hear a lot about trials on TV, most matters get settled before they get to the final trial. And for you to find out information about a case before trial, right, with respect to maybe a hearing, you need to dig deep, look at the court website, look at the information that has been filed. For trials, they're open to the public. You can go in and observe, maybe not with a camera, maybe not with a recording device, but you can personally go in and observe. And I think I'm out, so I will stop here. I want to thank you all for being great listeners.